In this guide, we'll go over all of the actions the Red Mage learns from level 50 to 90 in order. We'll go over how each action is meant to be used and when applicable, the recommended way to use it. We will also summarize changes to the rotation at level 60, 70 and 80. In the final summary, we will take time to outline both an opener and how it leads into the general rotation, and also briefly go over stat priorities. I will assume you have already seen my primer, which covers the level 50 experience specifically, and I will also assume that you are acquainted with abbreviations like GCD, oGCD and weaving. If either of these aspects are not familiar to you, please view the corresponding videos in the top right corner. Before we go through level gained actions, let's briefly cover changes introduced with Endwalker. Melee combos now cost a total of 50 of each mana type to complete. At the same time, your single target spells produce less mana to balance this out. Acceleration has been reworked and now instead makes your next long cast attack spell instant and guaranteed to ready either with stone or with fire. If spent on scatter, it instead boosts its potency a lot. At this level, the value gained from skipping Jolt is so massive that you should generally consider using acceleration on cooldown, and this also applies to swift casting. The value of having an instant cast spell for movement is also worth considering, so if you know something is coming up in a moment, it may be better to delay acceleration and swift cast for this. At higher levels, the way you use acceleration will change, but we will get to that a bit later. On AoE, you should also use it on cooldown for the scattered potency boost. Engagement is learned alongside displacement as an alternative that does not change your position, and as they do the same damage, you may prefer to use engagement if you don't need the movement. Core and displacement also have 2 charges each now, so for damage optimization reasons, you should make sure to use 1 charge of each early on in a fight, and only sit on at most 1 charge of each, if any at all. You now have access to the role action Sleep, although Red Mage likely won't find many uses for it. Now then, at level 52, you learn the weapon skill Moulinet, which works as an AoE alternative to the 1-2-3 melee combo. It costs 20 of each mana per use and is better than the melee combo on 3 or more targets. Take note that using Moulinet 3 times in a row costs 10 more of each mana type than the melee combo, and Moulinet can be used any number of times to spend as much mana as you wish at this level. At level 54, you learn the spell Cure, which heals for a very respectable amount for spammable DPS heal, and so can be used in a tough spot to save yourself or someone else. It also activates dual cast, so you can use this to prepare dual cast without an attack target when you need to. At level 56, you learn the ability Contre-Sixt, which is an AoE attack that is very similar to Flash. At any point you would use Flash, you should use Contre-Sixt, even on single target, since they do not share cooldown. At level 58, you learn the ability Embolden, which is a raid-wide damage buff that boosts everyone in your raid's damage, but specifically only boosts magic damage for yourself. This is because all of your oGCD attacks just so happen to all do physical damage, betrayed by them explicitly not denoting them doing either an element or unaspected damage. You should use Embolden as close to on cooldown as possible, although in a coordinated group, you may want to line up the cast with other raid buffs. This does indeed mean that sometimes Embolden will not line up with your own burst windows in the form of melee combos. At level 60, you learn the ability Manification, which immediately grants you 50 of each mana, letting you instantly jump into a melee combo. This should be used either on cooldown or delayed only a few seconds to line up with raid buffs in a coordinated group. Try to plan it so that you intend to use a melee combo immediately after using Manification, as some trait you learn later will make this important. Make sure you have at most 50 of both mana types when you use Manification, so none of its value goes to waste. The main differences to your rotation since level 50 now is that Moulinet is introduced as an AoE mana spender, Contre-Sixt is introduced as an extra oGCD attack to use on cooldown, and Embolden as well as Manification are introduced as cooldowns to boost your burst damage. Aside from this, your rotation is mostly unchanged. At level 62, Jolt is upgraded to Jolt 2, and all of your other single target spells get a big boost to their potencies. Your AoE options are still better on 3 or more targets, but on 2 targets you should now use Jolt instead of the Thunder 2 and the Arrow 2. Remember that, should you have the Fire or the Stone procs, they should take priority over Jolt on 2 targets too. Another major change this causes is in the way you should use Swiftcast and Acceleration. The massive boost to Jolt's potency means that skipping it is a significantly smaller damage gain. On the other hand, as you may have already noticed, using Acceleration or Swiftcast displaces the cooldown of Flash and Contra Sixt compared to your 5-second dual cast sets. This means using either Acceleration or Swiftcast to skip one Jolt at the same time also guarantees that you will delay your next Flash and Contra Sixt by 2.5 seconds. For this reason, you should continue to use Acceleration and Swiftcast for movement reasons, but otherwise you should only use Acceleration and Swiftcast together to displace by 5 seconds instead of just 2.5, or use them individually to displace Flash and Contra Sixt 2.5 seconds if they're already off by that amount for some reason. This does indeed mean that it is okay to sit on the cooldowns to have them for these purposes. At level 64, you learn the spell Veraze, which is the Red Mage version of a resurrection spell. While it has the same 8-second cast time that all of these types of spells have, dual cast works on it, enabling you to raise a player by casting Jolt over Cure and then Veraze. Don't forget to use Lucid Dreaming and watch your mana, but remember that bringing another player back to life is always more valuable than your next 2 GCDs, so don't be stingy. At level 66, Scatter is upgraded to Impact, which boosts its potency so immensely that it is now superior to use Impact on 2 targets over using the Thunder and the Arrow. This means that on 2 targets specifically, your rotation is to cast Jolt, Impact repeatedly. At level 68, you unlock the mana stack on your balance gauge and the spell The Flare. When you use the 1-2-3 melee combo, each step grants 1 mana stack, and when you use Moulinet, each Moulinet cast grants 1 mana stack. When you have 3 mana stacks, your The Thunder and The Thunder 2 both turn into The Flare, which does a large amount of damage with an AoE component and no cast time. If you generate mana stacks and then use any spell, then the stacks are immediately lost. As such, make sure to only use Moulinet when you have 60 of each mana type and then use it in sets of 3 specifically, such that you can use The Flare afterwards. In the same way, your melee combo is now extended to be 1-2-3 The Flare. If The Flare is used while you have less black mana than white mana, then it will always ready the fire. So at this level specifically, you should try to always use sets of Moulinet or the 1-2-3 combo with an excess of white mana if possible. At level 70, you learn the spell The Holy, which is the white magic equivalent to The Flare and overrides both the Arrow and the Arrow 2 under the exact same criteria. Now, whenever you have 3 mana stacks, you can use The Flare or The Holy depending on which one is lower. And if you already have a proc of the one that is lower, you can chance on getting a proc with the other one, although be aware that if the gap between the mana types is larger than 30, then mana imbalance will make the lower one more difficult to generate, so take that into consideration. Make sure you always generate mana stacks while your mana types are unequal such that there always will be one type that is lower. If they are equal, then neither one is guaranteed. Since level 60, you have unlocked a more powerful Jolt as well as Impact, changing the way you deal with 2 target encounters to Jolt and Impact spam. You also learned Veraze, possibly one of the strongest utility tools in the game. Make sure to use it when your group needs it. You also unlocked the mana stack alongside the Flare and the Holy, extending your melee combos with a powerful finisher where you should use the one that corresponds to the mana type that is lowest to ensure a proc. This finisher is also available after using 3 Moulinets. Just remember that the 1-2-3 combo costs 50 while Moulinet costs 60 to do 3 times. A thing to take note of is that with the introduction of the Flare and the Holy, your melee combo takes about 7.5 seconds in total to pull off, which means it will always displace Flash and Contra Sixt, so you may want to use Acceleration or Swiftcast to realign afterwards. At level 72, the potencies of Displacement and Engagement are increased slightly. At level 74, the cooldown of Contra Sixt is reduced slightly and the potencies of the Thunder 2 and the Arrow 2 are increased slightly. This does not change your rotation. At level 76, you learn the weapon skill Reprise. When you have 5 of each mana type, the Enchanted Reprise is an instant ranged attack that you can use if you have to move for a while and have no other options. Just be aware that it is very expensive in terms of mana types, so try to use it as little as possible if at all. At level 78, the cooldown of Magnification is reduced slightly, and it gains an effect that makes the next 5 magic attacks, including melee combos, do extra damage. The intended purpose is that you use Magnification, followed by either a 1-2-3 combo or 3 moulinets, and then the Flare or the Holy. The 5th attack is intended to be the spell that you learn at level 80. Aside from this meaning that it is much more important that you use Magnification followed immediately by a melee sequence, it does not really change your rotation. At level 80, you learn the spell Scourge. When you successfully cast the Flare or the Holy, Jolt and Impact both turn into Scourge, which is an even more powerful attack that also has an AoE component and no cast time. Aside from some potency increases and the introduction of Reprise and the adjustment on Magnification, the big difference since level 70 is that each of your melee combos now follow with the Flare or the Holy and then also Scourge. Similarly, sets of moulinets are followed by the Flare or the Holy and then also Scourge, effectively turning them into 5-step combos. With the introduction of Scourge into the melee combo, it takes about 10 seconds to pull off, meaning that it should no longer displace Flash and Contra Sixt. At level 82, the Thunder and the Arrow are upgraded into the Thunder 3 and the Arrow 3, making them stronger and flashier, but it does not change your rotation. At level 84, the rest of your regular ranged spells get a boost to their potencies. This also does not change your rotation. At level 86, you learn the ability Magic Barrier, which reduces magic damage taken for your raid and also boosts the healing they receive. The best time to use this is mostly any time you would want to use Addle to weaken a raid-wide attack, as these tend to be magic more often. If the tank is going to take a big magic hit, you can also use it to just help them. At level 88, Acceleration is upgraded to have 2 charges. This means you can much more regularly use Acceleration and Swiftcast as a pair for damage reasons, assuming you don't need it for movement or alignment of Flash and Contra Sixt. Try to use both Swiftcast and just 1 Acceleration for this, such that they both go on cooldown when you choose to do so. At level 90, the damage buff of Magnification is extended to 6 magic attacks, and you learn the spell Resolution. When you successfully cast Scourge, Jolt and Impact then turn into Resolution, which you should use immediately too, for even more damage with an AoE component. Keep in mind that Resolution is a surprisingly thin line AoE, while the Flare, the Holy and Scourge are all circle AoEs centered on your target. Additionally, adding in Resolution means that the full melee sequence takes around 12.5 seconds now, meaning that it once again displaces Flash and Contra Sixt. To round off, let's first talk about an opener, followed by general rotation tips, and then finish off with a brief talk about stat priorities. Keep in mind that openers in the optimal circumstances sometimes may be adjusted based on your team composition, but this opener will serve you perfectly fine for all content. 5 seconds before the tank pulls, start casting the Thunder, and then dual cast the Arrow, weaving both Swiftcast and Acceleration. Then you instantly cast the Thunder. If you intend to use a tincture, a so-called burst potion, this is a good opportunity to do so. Then cast the Thunder again and make your way into melee range while you weave Embolden and Magnification. Then you do Riposte weaving Flesh, Zwerchar weaving Contra Sixt, Redoublement weaving Corps and Engagement. Then cast specifically the Holy and weave Corps and Engagement again. Then cast Scourge and then Resolution. After this, you can make use of your the Fire proc and dual cast the Thunder, followed by making use of the Stone proc and dual cast the Arrow, and then your general rotation begins here. Make sure to use Flash and Contra Sixt on cooldown, and make sure that Corps and Engagement never sit on 2 charges, as that means you lose out on free damage. You can save 1 charge of each for mobility in case you need it, but you can also use them aggressively for extra damage. Make clever use of Swiftcast and Acceleration either to keep up your attack while moving, or to make sure that Flash and Contra Sixt are delayed as rarely as possible. With a lot of foresight and battle knowledge, you can also expend Swiftcast and Acceleration just for the purpose of extra damage, since skipping a Jolt cast is a small damage gain. Keep in mind that using your full melee combo always can result in a guaranteed proc of the Fire or the Stone too, so you could delay a melee combo until you can make use of this to avoid casting Jolt. It is important that Embolden is used on cooldown, and Magnification should preferably, although not a requirement, land in the Embolden window. but do make sure that you use Manification while both mana types are at most at 50. On 2 targets specifically, the Thunder and the Arrow are replaced by Impact, and Acceleration can be used generously to boost the damage of Impact. There is still reason to use Acceleration and Swiftcast to align with Flash and Contra Sixt, but since AoE encounters tend to be relatively short, this might be unnecessary. On 3 or more targets, Jolt, the Stone and the Fire are all replaced by the Arrow 2 and the Thunder 2. Your 1-2-3 melee combos replaced by 3 Moulinets. Remember that it costs 60 mana of each type rather than 50, so if you wish to use Manification for Moulinet combos, make sure you have at least 10 of each mana type beforehand. Make sure to use the one of the Flare and the Holy that corresponds to the mana type you have less of when given the opportunity, although on single target you can get creative if you already have the proc it would give you. Also, make sure you follow up with Scorch and Resolution afterwards. Now, let's briefly go over stat priorities. Keep in mind that in nearly every single case, item level beats out optimal secondary stats, so you should always prioritize high item levels first, as long as the item has intelligence on it. The recommended choice is to go for as much critical hit as possible, as this is the best scaling damage stat available. After that, Directed is slightly preferred over Determination, but they are very close in damage value. Finally, Red Mages prefer to have as little spell speed as possible. This is because you need to stack an enormous amount of spell speed to somehow, say, fit 4 melee combos in a 2-minute window rather than 3, which would be the only big benefit that would make a significant difference. Beyond that, Flash and Contra Sixt, not to mention your weapon skills, all don't benefit from spell speed, and as such, it is better to go for damage boosting stats. If you want to know what the absolute best options are, I would advise you to seek out communities that specialize in this, as anything I can say can be outdated as early as tomorrow. That is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions or anything to add, please leave a comment down below. Fun fact, while I would highly advise you not to do it, it is possible by stockpiling a full 100 of each mana type and sitting on Manification to unleash 4 full melee combos in about 1 minute.